The report said he was harmless. By the end of the night, 43 armed aliens were running from one man carrying a protein shaker. Let me start by saying this. I did not want this job. Nobody on the Grethnak's Pride wanted this job. Scouting missions to the Outer Rim are supposed to be simple. You find a planet with low technological development, you find a specimen with unremarkable biology, you snatch it, you scan it, you drop it back before it even notices its coffee has gone cold. That is the protocol. That is the entire point of low-risk reconnaissance. Nobody explains to you in training what happens when the specimen you selected has, apparently, skipped the memo about being unremarkable. My name is Thexul. I am, or was, before this incident, a perfectly respectable third-tier bioscout on a vessel commanded by a very proud, very loud individual named Yorvath. Yorvath had opinions about humans, strong ones. He used to say humans were the galaxy's punching bag, soft-bodied, slow, practically begging for extraction because their entire species seemed committed to walking around unarmed and unaware, staring at little glowing rectangles instead of the sky. He was very confident about this. I remember that confidence. I remember it fondly now, the way you remember a friend who is no longer speaking to you because you got him nearly killed by a creature that, and I want to stress this, was simply trying to get home from leg day. We were orbiting quietly, cloaked, running our standard scan of a mid-sized city on the human world, cycling through security feeds, traffic cameras, the usual. Yorvath wanted a subject that would be easy to grab and easier to study. Someone unremarkable. Someone the humans call, in their charming little slang, an average guy. That is how we found him. The feed showed a building with a sign reading Iron Sanctuary Fitness, glowing red against the dark. Figures came and went, mostly unremarkable, mostly soft, moving the way humans move, like their bones are slightly disappointed in them. And then the door opened, and out walked a mountain wearing a tank top. He was broad in a way that did not seem biologically efficient. His arms had their own arms. He was carrying, in one hand, a plastic jug roughly the size of an Earth toddler, filled with a chalky substance the scanners identified as, and I am reading this directly from the report, whey protein isolate, vanilla flavor. Yorvath leaned over my shoulder and laughed his wet, rattling laugh. That one, he said. Look at him, big and slow. The big ones are always the slowest. He will not even make it to the truck before he passes out from the shock. I want it on record that I said nothing. I want it on record that some small, quiet part of my three brains looked at the way that human walked. Shoulders back, chin level, like gravity itself was something he had personally negotiated a discount with, and thought, this does not seem like a creature who passes out from shock. But Yorvath was the commander, and commanders, as you know, do not enjoy being told no by scouts. So I stayed quiet, and I locked the coordinates, and I told myself this would be simple. His name, according to the wallet we scanned from his back pocket before we even took him, was Duke Halloran. 29 years old, 6 feet 3 inches, which in your measurements is embarrassingly tall for a species that mostly resembles a slightly overcooked noodle. 230 pounds, which our systems flagged immediately as a red category for mass efficiency, meaning he was heavier than expected for his height, meaning he was, and here is the phrase our onboard computer used, unusually dense. We should have listened to the computer. The computer is never wrong. The computer tried to warn us, and we, being idiots, being the kind of crew who thinks a jug of protein powder is a fashion accessory instead of a warning label, ignored it completely. Yorvath gave the order, grab him quiet, grab him quick, get him in the pod before the neighborhood cameras catch anything worth explaining to the council. Simple, clean, textbook. The beam engaged at 11:14 at night, local time. Duke Halloran was 70 meters from his apartment building, jug in one hand, gym bag slung over the opposite shoulder, when the world under his feet quite literally stopped being under his feet. Here is what I expected. I expected screaming. I expected flailing. I expected the specimen to drop everything he was holding and claw uselessly at the empty air the way every single previous human specimen had done, because that is what fear does to a body. It makes you let go of things. Duke Halloran did not let go of anything. He rose into the beam, feet dangling, tank top rippling in that strange electromagnetic wind we generate. And the expression on his face was not terror. It was not even surprise. It was the exact expression of a man who has just discovered that the elevator in his building is, once again, broken, and he is going to have to take the stairs, and he is annoyed about it, deeply and personally annoyed, but not remotely shaken. He looked up at our hull. He squinted. And then, and I will never, as long as I survive this report, forget this, he said out loud. To an empty sky, "Are you kidding me right now? I just did legs." He said it like we had personally scheduled the abduction to interfere with his recovery day. He said it like we owed him an apology. He came up through the hangar bay doors, still holding the jug, still holding the bag. 60 seconds into human contact, and already our extraction protocol had failed to account for the possibility that the specimen would treat interstellar kidnapping as a scheduling inconvenience. Yorvath met him personally, because Yorvath likes to make an entrance, likes to loom over new specimens with his 4 eyes and his long gray coat, likes the way most humans immediately start crying or praying or vomiting, which he finds, and I quote, deeply satisfying. Duke Halloran looked at him, looked at the eyes, looked at the coat, looked at the 2 guards flanking him, and said, "Okay, so which one of you clowns is in charge here, because I've got a shake to finish and this jug is not going to open itself." Yorvath, for the first time since I had known him, did not have anything to say. We put him in Containment Pod 7, which is rated, according to our own specifications, to hold up to 900 kilograms of resistant biomass without so much as a hairline stress fracture in the field wall. 900 kilograms. We have contained creatures on that ship with teeth the size of my forearm and skin like armor plating, and Pod 7 held every single one of them without complaint. Duke Halloran sat down on the little bench inside the pod, set his gym bag beside him like he was waiting for a bus, and cracked open the jug of protein powder. I watched him through the observation glass along with 3 other crew members, all of us silent, all of us slightly unsettled, because he was scooping powder into a shaker bottle he had produced from the gym bag, adding water from a small bottle also produced from the gym bag, and shaking it rhythmically like a creature completely unbothered by the fact that he was currently the property of an alien science vessel 40,000 kilometers above his home planet. He drank it in 3 long gulps, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked directly at the glass, directly at us, even though our systems assured me the glass was one way and he should not have been able to see anything but his own reflection. He said, "You guys got Wi-Fi in here, or is this a whole no-signal thing? Because if this is a no-signal thing, I am going to be very upset." Yorvath ordered the interrogation to begin immediately. He wanted answers about human military capability, about population centers, about the location of what our long-range scans had identified as significant defensive installations, though I later learned those were in fact shopping centers. He walked into the pod chamber, robes billowing in that dramatic way he loves, and stood in front of Duke Halloran with the posture of a creature who has broken the will of 1,000 lesser beings. "Human," he said, his translator crackling over the words, "you are aboard a vessel of the Thrall Dominion. Resistance is meaningless. Compliance will determine whether your species survives first contact with dignity." Duke Halloran wiped protein foam from his upper lip and said, "Buddy, I don't even know what a Thrall is, and honestly, the way you're dressed, I'm not sure I want to." I heard one of the guards actually laugh before catching himself. Yorvath's 4 eyes narrowed into something resembling a glare, though on his face it mostly looked like he had smelled something unpleasant. He tried again. He asked about weapons. Duke told him about his squat rack. He asked about defenses. Duke told him about his home security system, which apparently consists of a very loud dog named Biscuit. He asked about population density, and Duke asked if he could get his questions in writing because, quote, "this whole telepathic translator thing is giving me a headache, and I didn't bring my ibuprofen." At no point did Duke Halloran seem frightened. At no point did his heart rate, which our scanners were monitoring continuously, spike into anything resembling panic. It stayed steady, low, almost bored, the way a resting predator's heart rate stays steady while it watches something smaller wander past. We should have paid more attention to that. Yorvath, growing frustrated, decided to demonstrate the pod's containment capability. This is a classic intimidation tactic, showing a specimen the walls of their cage so they understand escape is impossible, understand their situation is hopeless, understand that struggling only wastes energy that could otherwise be spent cooperating. He gestured to the field controls, and the containment wall pulsed visibly, a shimmering blue barrier of concentrated energy, humming with a sound that most species find deeply unsettling, a low vibration that resonates directly in the chest cavity. Duke Halloran stood up, walked over to the wall, and pressed his palm flat against it. The field held. Of course it held. It is rated for 900 kilograms. He pressed harder. Yorvath actually smiled at this point, the wide, satisfied smile of a creature confirming his own superiority. See, human, absolute, total. There is no strength in your body capable of breaching a Threll containment field. Duke Halloran said, "Is that right?" and set his feet. I want to explain something about human anatomy that our onboard database, despite being updated regularly, apparently failed to account for. There is a specific action humans perform in their gymnasiums called a deadlift. It involves gripping a heavily loaded bar and using the posterior chain, the muscles of the back, the legs, and the hips, to generate an enormous amount of directed force in a single explosive motion. Our scans of Duke Halloran's musculature, taken during initial extraction, had flagged unusual density in exactly these regions. We noted it. We filed it under interesting biological variants. We did not, and this remains my greatest professional regret, connected to the phrase interesting biological variants, meaning this creature can probably rip a car door off its hinges. Duke Halloran did not deadlift the containment field. Containment fields do not have handles, but he did something with his shoulder and his hip that our systems later described, in the incident report, as a driving compound force application exceeding projected structural tolerance by 412%. In simpler terms, he hit the wall like a truck hits a guardrail, and the wall lost. The field didn't just flicker, it cracked, an actual visible fracture running through the shimmering blue surface like a spiderweb. Sparks spitting from the containment emitters mounted in the ceiling, alarms blaring through the corridor in that horrible looping tone we reserve for hull breaches. Yorvath's mouth was still open from his previous sentence. He had not finished being smug yet. He did not get the chance. Duke Halloran stepped through the crack in the field, protein shaker in one hand, gym bag over his shoulder, and said, "Deadlifts, man. Nobody ever believes me until they see it." What followed can only be described, honestly, as chaos, and I say that as someone who has personally witnessed a hull breach during an asteroid field crossing, which I would have, at the time, called the worst day of my professional life. That title has since been reassigned. Duke Halloran did not run screaming down the corridors looking for an exit, the way our threat assessment protocols assumed any escaping specimen would behave. He walked calmly, like a man taking a stroll through a mall he'd been to 100 times before, glancing left and right, occasionally opening cabinets and containers out of what I can only assume was pure curiosity, entirely unbothered by the fact that alarms were screaming and armed guards were converging on his position from 3 separate corridors. The first 2 guards who reached him, a pair of Threll enforcers named Grask and Molveth, both fully armored, both carrying standard-issue pulse batons, made the mistake of approaching him the way you'd approach any panicking specimen, cautiously, weapons raised, expecting him to bolt. Duke Halloran did not bolt. He unscrewed the lid of his protein jug, which he had, for reasons that remain unclear to me even now, retrieved from the pod on his way out, and threw the entire contents directly into Grask's face mask. Now, I need you to understand something about Threll respiratory systems. We do not process fine particulate matter well. Our internal filtration is optimized for gases, for toxins, for things with a certain chemical uniformity. A cloud of extremely fine, extremely dry protein powder, vanilla-flavored, clogging every intake valve on a standard Threll helmet, is not something our engineers ever tested for, because why would they? Why would anyone? Grask went down coughing, clawing at his helmet. Visibility 0. Alarms in his own ear now layered on top of the ship's alarms. Molveth, trying to help his partner, got the second half of the cloud directly in his own intake, and within seconds both of our finest enforcers were on the ground, wheezing, completely incapacitated by a substance humans willingly consume for breakfast. Duke Halloran stepped over them, retrieved his now empty jug, and said, "Protein's not just for gains, boys. Versatile stuff." Yorvath from the bridge was screaming through the comm system at this point, ordering every available crew member to converge on Deck 4, ordering the corridors sealed, and I remember this specifically because it struck me as increasingly desperate, ordering someone to just shoot him already. The trouble was, nobody wanted to shoot him. Not because of any moral objection, we are not a sentimental species, but because our stun weapons are calibrated for average biomass across a range of known galactic species, and nobody could get a clean estimate on what average even meant anymore for a creature that had just weaponized a protein shake. He made it to the central corridor, the long connecting hallway that runs the spine of the ship, right as I arrived from the observation deck, my own weapon drawn, hands shaking slightly, because I want to be honest, at this point I was genuinely afraid of a creature we had scanned less than an hour earlier as unremarkable. He saw me. He stopped. He looked at my weapon, looked at me and said, "Look, man, I don't even know your name, but I gotta be straight with you. I've had a really long day. I did legs. I got kidnapped. I've been assaulted with my own protein shaker, and I would really appreciate it if you just told me where the exit was so we could both go home." I did not lower my weapon. I want that on record. I did raise it slightly higher, which in retrospect probably communicated the opposite of confidence. He sighed, the way a parent sighs at a child who has asked the same question for the 4th time. And then he ran at me. Not fast, exactly. Not the frantic, panicked scramble our threat models predicted from a fleeing specimen. It was more like a controlled, purposeful jog, shoulders low, and by the time I processed that he was actually closing the distance, he had already closed it, and my weapon was somehow in his hand instead of mine, and I was somehow on the floor, and he was standing over me holding my own pulse pistol like it was a television remote he'd just found the batteries for. He looked at it, turned it over once, said, "Cute," and then set it down on a nearby console instead of using it on me, which I have thought about a great deal since, because I do not believe he needed to disarm me at all. I believe he did it because he found the whole situation, on some level, entertaining. The chase, if you can call it that, continued for another 11 minutes. 11 minutes does not sound like a long time until you understand that a Threll war vessel is not a large environment, and that every single crew member aboard the Grethnak's Pride, 43 individuals including myself, was actively involved in trying to recapture a single specimen who was, throughout the entire pursuit, visibly enjoying himself. He ran laps, actual laps. Down one corridor, up the maintenance stairwell, back along the upper gantry, past 3 separate squads who kept arriving seconds too late because he simply did not slow down, did not tire, did not show any of the biological limitations our own species experiences during sustained exertion. At one point, sprinting past a security team on the lower deck, he called out, over his shoulder, without even looking back, "Gotta keep the heart rate up, cardio's important too. Don't let anyone tell you it's not." And I remember thinking, with real and growing horror, that this creature was using our attempted capture of him as a workout. Yorvath, finally, in a decision that I believe history will not remember kindly, decided to confront Duke Halloran personally on the bridge, believing that his own combat conditioning, his rank, his authority, would be enough to end this humiliation once and for all. I followed at a distance because someone had to file the report, and because, honestly, I did not want to miss this. The bridge doors hissed open just as Duke Halloran arrived from the opposite corridor, still jogging lightly, gym bag bouncing against his hip, and the two of them faced each other across the wide chamber, starlight pouring in through the forward viewport. The whole scene looking, I will admit, extremely dramatic. Yorvath drew his ceremonial blade, the one he only uses for formal occasions, a long curved thing meant more for intimidation than actual combat, and said, "This ends now, human. You have caused enough damage to my ship, my crew, my dignity." Duke Halloran looked at the blade. He looked at Yorvath. He set his gym bag down gently on the floor, like he was preparing for something, and said, "Dignity, my man, was gone the second you tried to kidnap someone mid-protein shake. That ship sailed. That ship is in another galaxy now." Yorvath lunged. I want to describe this moment carefully, because it happened fast, and because it is to this day replayed in our tactical academy as a case study in what not to do. Duke Halloran did not dodge. He did not retreat. He stepped forward, inside the arc of the blade, and caught Yorvath's wrist with one hand, the same casual grip you might use to catch a ball tossed by a child, and simply stopped him. Stopped the entire motion, mid-swing, like Yorvath had run into an invisible wall. Yorvath, to his credit, tried to pull back. His wrist did not move. His arm did not move. His whole body strained against a grip that, according to our medical database, should not have been possible for a creature of Duke Halloran's mass and leverage. Duke Halloran said, "You know what your problem is? You skipped grip training. Everybody skips grip training. Biggest mistake in the gym, I'm telling you." And then, with what our sensors later calculated as a frankly insulting amount of ease, he twisted the blade free of Yorvath's hand, tossed it aside where it clattered uselessly against the bridge floor, and pushed Yorvath backward into his own command chair hard enough that the chair's stabilizing bolts groaned audibly. Yorvath sat there, stunned, 4 eyes wide, his ceremonial coat askew, staring up at a human who had just disarmed him with one hand while, and I noticed this detail specifically because it broke something in me, sipping the last dregs of protein shake residue out of his empty shaker bottle with the other. Silence settled over the bridge. Every remaining crew member who had followed us in, myself included, simply stood there, weapons lowered, because at this point nobody believed weapons were going to solve this particular problem. Duke Halloran looked around at all of us, at the viewport, at the stars, and said, "All right. So here's where we're at. You guys tried to kidnap me. That's a whole thing, and honestly, I could make this very difficult for you. I know some lawyers. Well, I know one lawyer. He does my brother's divorce stuff, but still." He crouched down, retrieved his gym bag, slung it back over his shoulder like the whole ordeal had been a mild detour on his walk home, and continued, "But I'm gonna be a decent guy about this. Because I get it, you probably don't run into a lot of guys like me, and that's on you, not on me. That's a research problem. That's a scouting problem. Somebody on this ship needs to be fired for target selection. I'm just saying." Yorvath, still recovering, managed to say, "What do you want?" Duke Halloran considered this for a moment, tapping his chin, and said, "All right, terms. 1. You fly me home, right now, back to the exact spot you grabbed me from, because I've got work in the morning and I am not explaining an alien abduction to my manager. He already thinks I make up excuses. 2. You leave my planet alone, permanently, because frankly, if I'm the unremarkable one you were hoping for, you do not want to meet the guys who actually try hard." He paused, then added, "And 3, and I really can't stress this enough, somebody on this ship owes me a new jug of protein powder, because you people wasted a full serving on that guy's helmet, and that stuff is not cheap where I'm from." Yorvath, defeated in every sense a commander can be defeated, short of physical injury, agreed to all 3 terms without further argument. I have never, in my service aboard the Grethnak's Pride, seen him agree to anything that quickly. The flight back to the surface was, against all odds, almost pleasant. Duke Halloran sat in the transport pod, chatting amiably with the pilot, a young Threll named Osek, who had, up until that day, never spoken directly to a specimen in his life. Duke asked him questions about the ship, about propulsion, about whether they had ever considered installing a sound system, because the ambient hum of the engines was, in his words, a vibe, but it could use a beat under it. He asked about our homeworld. He asked what we ate. When Osek nervously explained our diet consists primarily of processed nutrient paste due to the difficulties of organic cultivation during long-haul voyages, Duke Halloran looked genuinely disturbed, more disturbed than he had looked at any point during his own abduction, and said, "That's rough, man. That's actually rough. Nobody should have to live like that. You guys need real food. You need protein. You need something with texture." I do not know why this moment has stayed with me more than any other. Perhaps because it was the first time I saw genuine concern on a human face directed at us, rather than fear, rather than anger. He had every reason to hate us. He had been snatched off a public street, contained against his will, interrogated by a creature who had genuinely intended to study him like an insect. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, he had found room to feel bad about our diet. When the pod touched down, quietly, in the exact spot he had been taken from, the street empty, the neighborhood undisturbed, unaware that any of this had ever happened, Duke Halloran stepped out, stretched his arms over his head with an audible pop of joints, and turned back to face the open hatch. He looked at me specifically, and I want to be clear, I do not know why he chose me out of everyone aboard, perhaps because I had said the least to him during the entire ordeal, perhaps because I simply happened to be standing closest to the door. He said, "Hey, scout guy, you seem all right. Better than the loud one anyway." I did not know how to respond to this. I said nothing, which seemed to be the correct choice, because he continued without waiting. "Do me a favor. Next time your people are thinking about grabbing somebody off the street, don't. Just don't. Not because you'll get caught. Most people out here wouldn't fight back the way I did. Most people would just be scared, and that's worse, honestly. That's so much worse than what happened to me tonight. You got unlucky. You got the one guy who works out and has an attitude problem about being interrupted mid-recovery. Everybody else, you'd have actually hurt them. Just don't do it again. To anyone, anywhere." And then, because apparently even in a moment of genuine gravity this creature could not resist himself, he added, "Also, seriously, that protein powder, mail it to me. I gave that pilot kid my address, don't make this weird." He turned and walked away down the empty street, gym bag over his shoulder, disappearing into the dark toward his apartment building, footsteps echoing off the quiet pavement, leaving behind a ship full of the galaxy's supposedly superior predators, thoroughly and permanently humbled by a man whose greatest weapon turned out to be a jug of vanilla-flavored whey isolate and an absolute, unshakable refusal to be afraid. We filed the incident report the following cycle. It has since been distributed, under strict confidentiality protocols that I am, admittedly, currently violating by recounting all of this, to every scouting vessel operating within range of human space. The recommendation, official and unanimous, reads as follows. Target selection criteria for the species designated human must be revised immediately. Physical appearance is not a reliable indicator of threat level. Musculature, dietary habits, and general demeanor should all be weighted heavily during pre-extraction assessment. Under no circumstances should any specimen carrying what our scans identify as gym equipment, protein supplements, or displaying evidence of recent physical exertion be considered for abduction, regardless of apparent size, calm, or unremarkable status. In simpler terms, and this is the line Yorvath insisted we add personally, after 3 separate meetings with the Fleet Council, in which I am told he did not once make eye contact with anyone, do not, under any circumstances, mess with a man who has just done legs. As for me, I was reassigned. Desk duty, mostly, filing reports, running diagnostics, staying very far away from any away missions involving planets with gymnasiums. Yorvath, last I heard, requested transfer to a research post studying microbial life, which involves significantly less risk of being disarmed by a creature holding a protein shaker. Sometimes, late in the cycle, when the ship is quiet and the corridors are empty, I think about that human, walking home under a sky he had no idea we'd ever been watching, carrying an empty gym bag and an entirely justified sense of superiority. I think about how close we came to making a very permanent, very embarrassing mistake, and how the only thing that saved us from it was the fact that Duke Halloran, of all the specimens on that entire planet, happened to have skipped nothing at the gym that month. Not one single day. We had scanned an entire species and called it weak. We had looked at billions of soft, unassuming faces and decided none of them could possibly fight back. And then we grabbed the one guy who had spent years making sure that assumption would never, ever be safe to make again. If there is a lesson in any of this, and I have been told by my superiors to include one, since apparently these reports require a moral now, it is this. Never assume a species is harmless simply because most of its members appear that way on the surface. Somewhere on every world, in every gymnasium, on every quiet street at 11 at night, there is always one guy who has just finished his workout, who is deeply unwilling to have his evening interrupted, and who will absolutely, without hesitation, use whatever is in his hands, be it steel, be it stone, or be it simply a jug of vanilla whey protein, to make that very clear. We learned that lesson the hard way. I would strongly advise the rest of the galaxy not to make the same mistake.